Aloha everyone, I'm Samuel Johnson, and welcome back to the MCU Perspectives, a vlog series that probably shouldn't have been started, but it exists, so we're gonna keep going with it until the series it's about is over. And today, we are going to be taking a look at the 24th film to be released as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Widow. And since this is her first and probably only solo movie, I can finally talk about my personal history with the character prior to seeing this. And like with a lot of the other heroes in the Marvel Universe that I've been exposed to, I was first exposed to Black Widow through the Ultimate Avengers movie. Before that, I hadn't really heard a lot about her. Actually, scratch that. The most I heard about Black Widow was through the killer of the same name, who I don't was either fictional in a movie or was actually a real criminal that was turned into fiction. I don't know. But when I thought of Black Widow, I thought of the criminal who lured men in, married them, and then killed them. Likewise, when I saw the Marvel version appear in Ultimate Avengers, I just thought she was like a typical government agent that was like working for Nicholas Fury, and her code name just happened to be Black Widow. However, the more she appeared throughout the film, the more she was a prominent member of the Avengers, and I remember thinking when I first saw the film, is she a part of the Avengers? And the more she involved she was with the team, and the fact that she appeared in the sequel definitely tipped me off to the fact that yeah, she was one of them. She was one of them, and I admit I wasn't really that interested. For me, a superhero is one of the bigger guys, the ones in the flashy costumes with the awesome powers, etc. Or even just the flashy costumes. In my mind, that was enough. Even still kind of is, but that's not the point. My point is that I never really saw her as a superhero. I saw her as a member of the Avengers, just not one of the big names. So when the Marvel Cinematic Universe was rolling, I was kind of wondering what they would do with her. When I realized that they were going to be making movies for each of the Avengers to set them up for an Avengers movie, I just kind of thought to myself, well, what are they going to do with Black Widow? And by extension, another character, Hawkeye. Because I thought to myself, they're not really big names. They're members of the Avengers, but I don't really see movies with them kind of like drawing in that big a crowd. And thankfully, they found a way around that. They introduced Black Widow as kind of a side character and developed her from there, which is what we saw in Iron Man 2. She was introduced there as just kind of a side character that we learn more about and learn, oh, she's actually someone more important, and thus as the films went along, she was developed more and more. And honestly, watching the films, I thought she was actually really not. I thought this was actually a brilliant choice, because it allows you to still make her a part of the team, while also kind of having her attached to some of the bigger names and develop her through it in the background. Hold on a second. Sorry about that, dog. Anyways, yeah, I actually did appreciate that they were going to be developing her via other films. Like, she would appear here and there as a side character, and I think that was actually a brilliant move, considering that at the time she wasn't one of the bigger named superheroes. And honestly, back then, if they had tried a solo film, I don't see it actually succeed. I don't think it would have actually succeeded. However, as she continued appearing in the MCU and started building a bigger name for herself, more and more people were drawn to her, and more people wanted to see more of her. When Avengers films came out and all the other big name superheroes were getting merchandise with their names on them, people were wondering, well, where's the Black Widow merchandise? I like Black Widow. Where's her? Are we going to learn more about her, etc., etc.? People were clamoring for more Black Widow, and I admit my interest in her was growing as well. Even to the point where I did kind of learn a little bit more about her, albeit through online videos. For example, how in the comics she apparently started out as a villain in the Iron Man books, which kind of makes her appearance in Iron Man 2 more apropos, and eventually she wound up turning into one of the good guys, and even helped Hawkeye, who also started out as a bad guy, to come to the side of the Angels as well. So people were clamoring for more of her stuff, and ultimately there were talks of having a Black Widow movie and having her be having her essentially having a solo film that would further explore her backstory and give her a chance to just be the starring role instead of appearing as a side character in other movies. Although when Avengers Endgame came out, it kind of felt a little weird to suddenly have that film come out, especially since during Endgame, yeah. So pretty much a lot of people. So yeah, pretty much there was when Marvel Studios was revealing that they were still going to go forward with a solo film. People, of course, realized that it was probably going to be like an interquel, since odds are you can't have a Black Widow movie without Black Widow herself. So, of course, people were actually a little excited. We're still interested, but even though she had died in Endgame, people were more interested in seeing more about her, especially since the film promised to wrap up all the loose ends, considering that a lot of people weren't that happy with how she died during Endgame. And of course, the film was supposed to be released last year in May. Then COVID happened. As a result, the film got delayed at least a few times. At first, the film was planned for a November release, but then when people realized that COVID wasn't just going to go away by then, the film once again got delayed to May of this year, which is when it was supposed to be released, until it once more got delayed by like a couple months and was released earlier this month at the time of this recording. Of course, a lot of people were still clamoring to see the movie, myself included, and so every time that it got delayed, they definitely were like, oh, come on. But eventually, the film did come out, and in the beginning, the film made a lot of money. It definitely got a huge rise on the opening weekend. A lot of people went to see it. Although, from what I've heard after looking it up online, apparently after its opening weekend, the revenue kind of dropped by 64%. So apparently this wasn't the big cash cow that Marvel and Disney hoped it would be, which I think kind of makes sense, and I'll get into my thoughts on that when I actually continue talking about when I get to wrapping them up. But with that being said, though, even though the film did kind of drop a little bit, did drop somewhat in revenue in the box office, is this a good movie by itself? Like, is this the film that we as Marvel fans have been clamoring for years, and was it worth the wait to get it? Well, we should probably let's talk about it and find out. And just a heads up for everyone watching, one, this is a long video. This is going to be a really long video. You're probably looking at the time and realizing that already, but the MCU perspectives go on for a long time. It's part of the reason why I was relieved when I wrapped them up with Spider-Man Far From Home. So I recommend, like, if you want to continue watching these, probably just play it while you're doing something else. To keep yourself from getting bored. So yeah, that's just a heads up. And second thing, I'm going to be spoiling this movie rotten. I'm going to talk about a lot of major plot details, and I'm not going to omit anything. So, considering that at the time of this video's release, the film is still relatively new and in theaters, I recommend to not watch this. At least, unless you want the film spoiled. So, if you haven't seen the film yet, if you haven't seen the movie yet and don't want the film spoiled for you, turn back now. Turn back now, because once we're in, there's no going back. So, yeah. With all that said, let's get to the long ass summary. And just a heads up, I took notes, so I may occasionally be looking back at these every once in a while. So you may see me pull this up, turn a page or whatever. So yeah. Story. The movie actually opens up in Ohio in the year 1995. It opens up with this little family just kind of doing their everyday thing. There's an older sister who likes to color her hair, a younger sister who's just like kind of playing on who's playing in a little swing set, and she and her sister are having fun, just kind of enjoying themselves, though while they're playing, the younger sister ends up scraping her knee and ends up crying, which of course gets the attention of their mom. Their mom is able to patch it up and gives her the whole mother spiel about kissing it, making it feel better, and she even tells her it's fine, you'll be okay. Your pain only makes you stronger, which is actually a line in here, which the older sister ends up hearing. They then have a nice little moment where they're looking up to the trees and see a bunch of fireflies, and it's just cute and everything. But the mother ultimately calls the two daughters into the house because it's time for dinner. So, at first, everything seems just like a normal family get-together. They're all just coming together, enjoying themselves, getting dinner ready. The younger daughter wants mac and cheese, yada yada yada. It's all just kind of sweet. That is till the dad comes home. Of course, at first, the daughters are all happy to see him, and they're still getting ready for dinner. But the mother soon realizes that something's up with the dad because he seems a little more stoic. As such, they go into the other room while the two daughters are eating, and just by the look on his face, she realizes that the time has come, so to speak, as he pulls out what looks like a disc or something from his pocket. Ultimately, the mom asks how long they have, and he says not long, maybe an hour. And so the mother says she doesn't want to go, but the dad says they really have no choice. So he ends up going into the room and tells the daughters that, that adventure I've been saying we're gonna have to go on. Well, the time has come, and the youngest daughter is like super excited, like yay and everything. But the mom and the older daughter clearly are clearly upset by this knowledge. As such, they all just pack whatever they can, just kind of like the barest necessities. They don't even grab their shoes or anything, and they all just kind of pile into the family truck and just drive away. Of course, when the youngest daughter asks where they're going, the mom just says we're going home, which even the daughter's like, but mom, we just left home. As such, they end up going out. As such, they end up driving to an airfield where there's a plane waiting there for them. However, as they're getting all loaded up and getting everybody on the plane, the police end up showing up. And so the dad says, you get everything ready, I'll take care of this. And it's clear that the dad is not your average dad, which, of course, should be obvious by this point, but while they were getting everything prepared, he actually just, threw an entire, I don't want to say a tank, but at least, a hitch or just kind of a trailer or something. He just threw it with one hand, and it looked like it was a very heavy trailer. Probably would have taken, 5 men to even just pick it up, maybe even a forklift or something. So this guy is clearly strong, but once the police arrive, he just pulls out a gun and starts opening fire, and it leads to a shootout while the mom is trying to get the plane all ready so they can fly off, but in the middle of the shootout, some of the bullets fly through the window and hit the mother. As such, the oldest daughter has to take control of the plane, and she's able to ultimately get the plane in the air while still allowing the dad to fend off the police, and he even managed to get on the plane himself, as during the shootout he jumped on the wing and got inside once they were clear. As such, we then cut to the next day as we see the plane coming into a set of islands, and the giant "Where are they?" text immediately shows they're in Cuba. As such, a bunch of soldiers are there to meet them, and it's there where we meet the film's villain, so to speak. His name is... Where is it? I know. Dreykov. His name is Dreykov, and once the plane lands, the dad immediately comes off, and he goes up to Dreykov, and they just act like they're old friends. And we soon learn that, if it wasn't obvious right now, the family was a plant. They were essentially sleeper agents implanted in the U.S. to try and get information. As we learn later, they've been keeping this cover up for 3 years right at this point. Sorry, I'm gonna adjust this a little. So, and the disc that the father stole was the information that they needed, which is why the police are after them. And it's also through this little dialogue that we learn that the father is actually someone called the Red Guardian, so to speak. And just kind of a quick recap on him. The Red Guardian is apparently like the Soviet Union equivalent of Captain America. He's got the super soldier serum coursing through his veins. He's got super strength, super agility. It's why he was able to throw that load like he was. But it's clear that by this time, his days as a superhero are behind him, as he's kind of been relegated to just doing, menial tasks, which he's not really okay with, because he immediately goes to Dreykov and is like, come on, I got to get some action. I want my suit back and everything. But Dreykov's just kind of, brushing it off. However, as such, while the mother is taken on a stretcher and taken away, the resident soldiers try to go after the younger daughters, but the older one grabs a gun and just points at everyone, saying, don't you dare touch her or I will kill you all. And as such, the father then goes up to her and says, just stop, and he's able to disarm her, but the older daughter says, no, they can't take her, she's only 6, to which the father responds, you were even younger. But he then reassures them that, I know you can do it, you girls are strong. And while he has them distracted, they both are immediately knocked out, but they both are each knocked out. At which point, as the bodies are carrying away, Dreykov asks the Red Guardian, well, who was the older one? She got fire. And he says, that's Natasha. At which point we get our opening sequences. We get flashes of Natasha and her sister's life. Which, just gonna say right now, her younger sister's name is Yelena. But essentially, we just see them as they're being put through the training, through the Red Room, so to speak. And it's admittedly just kind of a creepy sequence and heartbreaking, to say the least. Especially when they I forgot the name of the song, but it goes like, it's like, oh, it smells like Teen Spirit. They play like a slowed down, much more melodramatic version of that over the whole sequence, and it's just like creepy. But as the sequence continues going on, but once the sequence wraps up, we cut to 21 years later, and we meet the adult, and we once more see the adult Natasha, who is now Black Widow. And pretty much, in terms of, as I said at the beginning of this video, in terms of continuity, the majority of this film takes place between Civil War and Infinity War. So, at the time that this is happening, Natasha is actually on the run from the government, who, of course, is being led by General Thunderbolt Ross, who is leading a squadron of soldiers to try and arrest Natasha, but it turns out that it's a red herring. She just left a tracker in her uniform in a bathroom stall while she's not even on U.S. soil. She's actually in Norway, just kind of trying to lay low and try and do her best to survive. Even having a friend of hers setting her up with a trailer and giving her a bunch of false identities, including one named Fanny Longbottom, which is just funny. And she's just pretty much at this point, she's just doing her best to try and stay under the radar as best as she can. However, while she's settling into her little home, to her little trailer, one of the things that she notices is this pile of mail. As the guy who set her up with this said that he grabbed this from one of her safe houses in Budapest, which he called Budapest, but I'm gonna call it Budapest because screw it. Sorry if I'm insulting anyone. I'm legitimately sorry. But bottom line, he thinks that she'd want it, but she doesn't really seem interested. In fact, she just throws the pile of mail in the back of her back of her van. And she just spends the rest of the day just kind of doing what she can, just getting a meal ready, watching a movie, etc. But then the power to her trailer goes out because the generator is powered by gas. So as such, she has to go into town and get some. But as she's driving into town, her van is attacked. Like a missile comes up and blasts it, and she just knocked it, and she flies into a bridge. And as she's getting her bearings together, she sees another car rolling up, and out of it comes our secondary villain, and the one who, in my opinion, is a lot more interesting, Taskmaster. Now, I said that Taskmaster was probably in an earlier movie in the MCU, like Civil War, but I was wrong. I was dead wrong. Apparently that character was a character called Crossbones, I think. Don't quote me on that. I really don't know anything about the character, and honest to God, I'm not that interested. Which, I'm sorry if you really love the character, because apparently he's a really intimidating supervillain, and the MCU did him dirty, so I'm sorry for fans of the character, but I never heard of him prior to actually learning his name, so yeah, I'm not really that interested. But yeah, this is where we get the actual appearance of Taskmaster in the MCU, and I freaking love him. I'm not kidding. Like, once Natasha sees Taskmaster, she immediately opens fire on him, and he immediately just pulls out a shield and throws it at her like Captain America. And she's ultimately able to get out of her vehicle, at which point she and Taskmaster start getting into a fight, and it's kind of an even match. Like, he's showcasing moves that the Avengers he's showcasing moves that all the Avengers know, and in hand-to-hand combat, he's actually able to mimic her perfectly. However, in the middle of the fight, he actually stops going after her and instead looks to the remains of her van. At which point, Natasha realizes, you're not here for me, you're here for something in there. As such, she tries to stop Taskmaster from getting to her van, at which point, she looks to the pile of mail, as that's where he seems to want to be heading towards, and she finds a package with this, with a bunch of vials all in a circle, containing this strange red substance. Ultimately, she tries grabbing the package and running away, but Taskmaster manages to overpower her and even manages to knock her off the bridge. However, when Taskmaster goes to the package, it's now empty. As it turns out, Natasha was able to grab those vials and get away when Taskmaster knocked her off. Hold on a sec. Sorry about that. Once again, dog. Anyway, so as Natasha just kind of ends up washing up on shore, she ends up looking through the vials, and contained in the center of them is like one of those photo lines you get from a photo booth, and it's pictures of her and her sister Yelena back when they were kids. At which point Natasha realizes that this has something to do with her sister, and so she travels to Budapest to her safe house, and sure enough, Yelena is there waiting for her. Of course, they're both unsure of each other and whether they should trust each other, and so they get into a fight, but it ultimately ends with Natasha declaring a truce. As such, they get to talking, and Yelena pretty much explains that the reason she sent she sent the vials to Natasha because apparently Natasha's old life is kind of starting to catch up to her. Like, okay, I'll just try and explain it as best as I can. Essentially, the Red Room, the thing that Natasha was worked through that turned her into Black Widow, gave her all her skills and everything, she originally believed that it was destroyed, that it was gone for good. Well, it turns out that's a load of crap. The Red Room is still around, and it's still creating more widows like Natasha, albeit worse. Apparently, whereas Natasha was given mental conditioning to try and make her think that the Red Room was what she needed to be, what she needed to be a part of, and that she had no other way. After Natasha broke through her conditioning and defected and joined up with the West, Dreykov, who was the head of the Red Room, was apparently decided to create a new form of mental conditioning, chemical conditioning. Essentially, as we learn later on, it's a process that essentially strips the user of their free will and makes every single decision they make someone else's. As long as you have the command board, you can make you can make any of these people do whatever you want. You can make them stop, you could make them fight, you can make them try and hurt themselves, you can make them stop breathing. Essentially, and as Yelena describes it, it's like you're aware, but you're not aware. It's like you're aware, you know what's going on, but you're not sure what parts are you and what parts are the system. And it's actually really fucking creepy, which is where the vials come in. Apparently, the vials were created by a former widow who managed to get away from the Red Room as well, and essentially essentially what's contained in the vials is a substance that, when breathed in as a gas, essentially makes the user immune to chemical conditioning. Essentially, any who breathe it in who are under mind control or who are and are part of chemical conditioning, essentially it strips away the chemicals and gives you your free will back, which apparently is what happened to Yelena. As in the beginning of the movie, we saw her leading a team of widows to try and go after this woman, and while Yelena went in for the kill, the woman managed to get Yelena a sniff of gas, and it allowed her to get free, with the lady telling her to free the others before she expired. As such, Yelena sent these vials to Natasha because she thought that she could give it to one of her friends and they could find a way to mass produce it, figure out what makes it tick so they can use it to free the other widows. But again, Civil War happened, so the Avengers aren't exactly a tight-knit group at the moment. So right now Natasha's on her own, which Yelena isn't exactly happy about. However, Natasha herself is still a little dubious about this whole story altogether, especially since, in her own words, she killed Dreykov. Apparently, it was like the final step in her essentially, it was the final step in her defection over to S.H.I.E.L.D. Like, she apparently set up bombs and they blew up. She set up bombs at his personal residence and let him just get blown up, but good. And so she thinks that everything is good, that he's actually dead. But Yelena just kind of scoffs at that and even says, well, what about her daughter? What about his daughter? And she said that she was the key to getting the Dreykov, and that's all Natasha says about it. It's clear there's something going on, but before the conversation can continue, the safe house is attacked by more widows. Natasha and Yelena are able to escape to the safe house and get more into a shootout, but in the middle of the battle, Natasha and one of the widows end up kind of fighting and end up falling from a great height, with the first widow falling and breaking her leg, while Natasha suffers a few injuries that should pretty much paralyze her. But while on the ground, Natasha tries to say, I just want to help you, but even then, the lady's getting her stinger ready to blast her, and at which point we then see Dreykov on a little touch screen, and he orders the widow to kill herself, which she reluctantly does, with her last words being, it's not me, I don't want to do this, before just zap. At which point, Natasha realizes that Yelena is not lying, and so they realize that the Red Room is still a threat. As such, they kind of go on the run. Natasha and Yelena are kind of go on the run together. Hold on a second. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah. After that little thing, after seeing after seeing that attack, Natasha and Yelena try and run off, try and continue on the run, but more widows attack. And while they're able to to fend off most of them, the Taskmaster ends up joining in the fray as he's riding essentially what looks like a tank, and he manages to essentially derail their ride as that during the chase they manage to get a hold of a car, and he manages to completely crash the car and right into a subway. Thankfully, Natasha is able to find a way to outwit Taskmaster because Yelena suffered like a very heavy injury, which is causing her to bleed out. And so Natasha brings her down to the subway and causes her to bleed up to a grate. And as such, when Taskmaster follows, he thinks they go down to the grate, when in reality they patched up the wound just before going there, and instead went up into the ventilation, with Taskmaster going down while they're still up. As such, and it turns out that this is actually a place that she and Clint apparently had stayed because after the whole affair with I keep forgetting his name, Dreykov, they apparently stayed there for days while the heat died down. But while things are going on, Yelena continues pushing Natasha more and more about what happened when she quote unquote killed Dreykov, and Natasha does reveal the truth. It turns out that Natasha had been tailing Dreykov's daughter to the safe house, and when she followed her there, they had to be sure that Dreykov was actually there, which unfortunately meant that his daughter was kind of a casualty, as like she said, they placed bombs in his place of residence, and so once they blew it up, unfortunately Dreykov's daughter was caught in the crossfire. She was essentially killed, and that has kind of been weighing on Natasha's conscience. She's been trying to get through it herself because she's trying to think there was no other way. I had no choice, but it's clear that it's a sore subject, especially since every time it comes up, she doesn't want to talk about it, which, let's be honest, who would? Who would want to talk about that? As such, they kind of go on the lam together, and they go to like a little repair shop. They go to like a little store where they get supplies, and they're trying to figure out a strategy. They have a simple conversation, and it's clear that Natasha, and while Yelena is trying to engage Natasha a little bit, Natasha isn't really going for it. She just kind of thinks that she just thinks we were not really family. We were just killers. We're just killers. And Yelena kind of responds with, "We're still killers. We're still killers. It's just that I stayed a killer, whereas you went on to become a superhero and are now idolized by little girls." Like, I know I butchered that, but it's essentially like a take that, so to speak. Like, they're still killers. It's just that Natasha's got better press. So, yeah, there's still some tension there. However, as the day goes on, ultimately Natasha realizes that with the Red Room is still a major problem. They can't let it keep going. And these vials are the key to fixing everything, since they're what can deprogram the widows. So, ultimately, Natasha and Yelena... Sorry, I'm adjusting this again. Natasha and Yelena decide that they need to work together to take down the Red Room. But there's a problem. They don't know where it is. Apparently, the location of the Red Room just keeps changing, and anytime a widow is brought back there, they're knocked out, so they have no idea where they are. So, it's clear that they kind of need to get some inside help. They need someone that was close to Dreykov to tell them where the Red Room is, which is where we get back to the Red Guardian. As we cut to him in a prison, and it's clear he's not as physically fit as he was back in the flashback to 1995. He's gotten fatter, he's grown a beard out, but he's still got his superpowers, as he apparently spends his days recounting quote-unquote stories of battles of Captain America that never happened, while also beating every other inmate in the prison at arm wrestling. At one point, he even breaks the hand of one guy who calls him out on his BS. So it's clear he's still powerful and strong, but at the same time, it's also clear he's not exactly at his peak. His better days are behind him, and he's not exact. And while people in the prison still call him the Red Guardian, it's more mocking. None of them have any respect for him, to the point where when he gets called to the front office to get his mail, they're eating all this. They're eating the snacks that his fans sent him and just openly mocking him, saying, "When you write back to your fans, tell them to add sugar," or something like that. Like, it's just like them just being dicks for the sake of being dicks. However, one of the packages he got in the mail was a Red Guardian action figure, which actually does kind of get a smile out of him as he kind of toys around with it, presses a chest button, and pulls a string in the back. But then the head of it pops off, and he finds an earpiece inside. And when he puts it in, it turns out that the people who sent the action figure were Natasha and Yelena, who tell him, "This is your lucky day. We're gonna break you out." So essentially, they engineer the prison break by telling him to try and go out a certain way by messing with the security. But unfortunately, as he tries to make his escape, it gets the attention of the other prisoners, and it causes a full-blown riot. So things get a lot more difficult as all these prisoners start running out. All the guards have to come out and try and trank them. And while the Red Guardian does make it outside, even with his strength, he's clearly not been in battle for a while, as even though he's scaling walls and knocking people back, he is getting tased, so it's clear he needs backup. As such, Natasha goes in to face them while Yelena is staying back because they took a helicopter to get out here, which once more supplied by Widow's contact. I don't remember the guy's name, I'm sorry. But things are continuing to heat up, which is not helped by the fact that the guards are opening fire on the helicopter. As such, Yelena pulls out a rocket launcher and blasts it directly at them and hits a smokestack, thinking that they're clear. But thing is, this prison is located in the mountains, in the middle of a snowdrift. And what happens around a mountain when there's a loud noise? It causes an avalanche. As such, all the other prisoners see this, and they and all the guards immediately try bolting back inside. Whereas whereas Natasha realizes they have to go get the Red Guardian quick. So Yelena comes in and manages to grab Natasha, and Natasha manages to swoop in and grab the Red Guardian before they fly off. And so Red Guardian's just all happy, like, "Yeah, I'm out of here. So long, douchebags!" And like he's just happy, and he's like, "Oh, I'm so proud of you kids." And their response is just to elbow him in the face. As such, after we get some cringe comedy with him trying to bond with his girls, and they immediately say, and even making a joke about their periods, at which point they tell him about how the Red Room took out their reproductive organs in very graphic detail. Natasha immediately just cuts to the chase and wants to know exactly where the Red Room is, and it turns out that the Red Guardian doesn't know. Which, it admittedly does get on their nerves. Like, Natasha's like, "We just risked life and limb for you, and you have no idea where he is. Weren't you like his little buddy?" And it turns out that the Guardian isn't exactly happy with his friend Dreykov. Sorry, I keep checking I keep forgetting his name. It turns out that Dreykov and the Guardian are not on the best of terms anymore. After, essentially, remember how, the thing we saw at the beginning of the movie, that little cover with him, the mom, who we later learned is named Melina, and Natasha and Yelena? That was essentially the equivalent of an office job. Like, he was one of their best agents, but after the Red Guardian name and the whole marketing that came with it, what kind of ran its course, Dreykov just shuffled him away to do something else, and pretty much once that mission was done and the Red Guardian wanted to do something else or get better or go back into action, Dreykov pretty much decided, "You know what, I don't need you anymore," and just threw him into that little prison that they found him in. Essentially, so yeah, he does not like Dreykov anymore, and he's not exactly on good terms with him. So, and although one part of his little rant toward Dreykov that does get to the girls, or at least Yelena, is the fact that he says that the whole cover thing was just boring, just day in day out of tedium and just wanting to get into action, and you can tell through Yelena's expression that just hurt her, even though he does respond with "no offense," which I'll get to him later. But bottom line, the Widows are not exactly happy that they just wasted a prison break on this guy, but he does admit that even though while he doesn't know where they are or where the Red Room is, he does know someone that does. And he soon reveals that their mother, or their cover mother, so to speak, is actually alive and still is working for the Red Room. As such, they're able to go where they are. They're able to travel to where she's situated, though the helicopter crashes because they didn't have enough gas. And we see that their mother, or who I already said was named Melina, is doing kind of experiments involving pigs. And when they get close, her defense systems end up going off, and she sees them coming in, and you can just see like her heart melting when she sees them coming in. Like she sees them, and the Red Guardian's response is, "Honey, we're home." And just without a word, she just kind of holds her gun up and just walks past them to her house with the group following. As such, they all go in, and it's actually kind of it's a very tense yet also heartwarming scene, because throughout the whole thing, Natasha is still being tense, and Melina is trying to act like there's nothing wrong. It's like hold on, let me get you something to drink, or let me get dinner ready, or like it's like don't be weak. I didn't raise you to be like that. And it's like, no, you didn't raise us at all. It's like true, but if you got soft, it wasn't on my watch. It's just, and at the same time, Melina, when she sees the whole room, you can just feel like this sense of you can just feel her just kind of taking it all in and feeling like, this is my home. This is where I belong. It's just kind of sweet. At the same time, we also see the Red Guardian just kind of struggle to get back into his suit, which admittedly was actually really funny, because he's obviously gained weight, so the suit was obviously fitted for his younger body, but he does ultimately manage to get into it, and I'll give credit where it's due. I like the Red Guardian suit. It's a nice little counter to Captain America. It definitely invokes the same imagery, except definitely with a more Soviet feel, which is what the Red Guardian was supposed to be. So, I admit, I actually do like the costume. Definitely feels a lot like a Captain America suit, while still be acting as a counter. So, good stuff. However, as the group kind of sits down to talk, around to talk, Natasha wants to get just cut straight to the point, because she thinks that they need to find the Red Room, but the rest of the family is just kind of treating this like the family's back together again. But Natasha isn't taking any of that. Which, hold on, I might have written something down here. Hold on. Again, apologies in advance here. Pause for a second. So yeah, like I said, pretty much Natasha is just wanting to get straight to the point and wants to know more about the chemical subjugation, where the Red Room is. And yeah, it turns out that Melina was actually very much part of the process. She helped develop it, and it turns out that essentially they got the formula for it from a Hydra lab when they were still operating in SHIELD. Essentially, they found a way to map out the human. Essentially, they managed to break into facilities where they were keeping the Winter Soldier and essentially find the map of a human brain, and essentially figure out all the ins and outs until they were able to find a way to completely subjugate free will. However, Melina admits that while she developed the formula, once it was put into action, she had nothing to do with it. All she did was just get the numbers all organized and get the formula in check, which he demonstrates on a pig by ordering it to come into the house and ordering it to stop breathing. At which point, as the conversation continues to get more tense, and everyone tries to get more familial, Natasha just snaps and says, "Our family was never real." Like, she calls the Red Guardian a coward. She calls Melina she calls Melina out. I forgot exactly what she said, but bottom line, she just keeps telling them it was all fake. None of it was real. That they are never really, that nothing that they had was ever a part of it, which actually does start to get to Melina, because even she admits that it was real to her. While she may never have known her family, these people were the closest thing she had to one. And the fact that they're all still sitting here and saying everything we had was a lie, it's seriously getting to her. So she's saying, "You're telling me that I actually wrote this line down because it's powerful. the best part of my life was a lie, and none of you told me. And when she says the line, you can hear her voice break, and she's just obviously so hurt. And so she just kind of storms out of the room and go. She just kind of storms out of the room to go to a bedroom, with the Red Guardian going behind saying, "I'll take care of it." As such, we have two separate scenes where we see Natasha and Melina and the Red Guardian and Yelena kind of bonding with each other. Like Natasha and Melina are talking, and they talk about how apparently that none of it was like they can try and go on the fact that none of it actually mattered. It was all just a cover. But Natasha points out something kind of crucial. You see, when the family was kind of trying to flee from their home, one of the things that Natasha had to grab was a photo album, which she was told to leave behind. And in the photo album was pretty much a bunch of fake photos that Natasha and Yelena took to try and add to their cover, which were like all these holidays, special events, etc., to just try and make it look more real. And Natasha admits that even though she knew that all that was fake, even special mentioning the Christmas one, because she knew that all the presents were fake, she wanted just nothing more than to rip them all open. And they pretty much talk about how they genuinely, how at the end of the day, that how those memories, now there was still something there throughout everything, and they definitely did hit more. That it wasn't that for some of that while it was largely a cover, they did still kind of care about it. They did still care about each other. At which point, even Melina asks her, "How are you able to keep your heart? How are you so strong able to keep your heart?" To which Natasha replied, "I remembered what you said. My pain only made me stronger. It allowed me to bear through all the bad stuff and keep fighting." At which point you can actually feel Melina's heart breaking as she tells her, "I'm just kind of, like I'm just a I'm just like I've been like I'm just a mouse running like I'm just like a mouse." She compares herself to a mouse running in one of those little wheel things. That she was born in the Red Room and she ran through it 4 times. Like she knows no other life. That's why she's still there. And Natasha tells her, "You can't help where you were born. You can't help being born in a cage. But so I don't really hold that against you. But it doesn't mean you have to stay in there." To which Melina responds with, she had already contacted the Red Room prior. They'll be there in minutes. As such, we then get actually a legitimately nice scene between Yelena and the Red Guardian, as as the Red Guardian tries to have an emotional moment with her, but he botches it up. But how he's able to get through to her is by singing her one of her favorite songs, as when she was a girl, she apparently liked the song American Pie. And so as they're talking, he begins reciting the lyrics, and it shows that while he did consider the job kind of tedious, he did genuinely care about Yelena and wanted her to be safe. So I at least like that. It was a touching moment. But of course, that's when the soldiers from the Red Room come and pretty much just end up knocking out the Red Guardian by just shooting him with a bunch of tranks, which I actually thought was funny. Like one shoots through and is like, "Do you think that'll stop him?" Before he can finish the sentence, they just shoot a bunch more tranks into him, which I think is cute. It's funny and makes sense. But as Yelena tries getting out of the room, but when she gets out there, she finds Melina in a black jumpsuit standing over an unconscious Natasha, and Melina immediately zaps her with one of the stingers, and Yelena ends up getting knocked out as well. At which point, Natasha, Yelena, and the Guardian are all gathered up and brought onto a plane, and they're all being flown up. And so the Red Guardian does kind of wake up a little, and as he sees them flying up, he hears Melina say, "We're going to be docking soon." It's like, "But how are we docking? We're going up." And we soon learn why the Red Room why no one could ever find the Red Room. It's a station in the sky, and we see it just kind of floating there, and and I admit it actually does look intimidating, and it definitely is one of those. And when they actually do approach it, it definitely does feel like they're reaching like the final boss, so to speak. So the Red Guardian is knocked out again, and so everybody is separated. Natasha and the Red Guardian are thrown into their own cells right next to each other. Yelena is brought into a room where they're planning to put more new implants in her to make her more subservient again. In the meantime, Melina is brought up to Dracov's office. And essentially Dreykov just wants to get an update on what's going on, and so Melina said, And he wants Melina to head the project to counter the counter agent, so to speak. And I should probably mention that he has Taskmaster on standby. So he pretty much however, as he's talking, he mentions what his plans are with Natasha, how he plans to chemically induce her and put her under his control, because he essentially sees this as a golden opportunity. Because they mentioned earlier in the movie that when Natasha turned traitor, the reason Dreykov never went after her was because she was too much in the public eye. It would definitely turn a few heads if suddenly one of the Avengers just went MIA. So, and he did not want to get the attention of any of the heavy hitters like Captain America or Thor or Iron Man. So he just kind of stayed away from her. But now that he's got her back in his clutches, he thinks that with an Avenger on his stead, he can get even more people under his thrall. Get a bunch of because Natasha's idolized across the world, and if he can keep her under his control, he can get more. He can get those little girls to look up to her to follow him. And just ultimately step out of the shadows, as it were. Of course, Melina wonders how she'll be able to do that. At which point he tells her, you can't really raise someone, and when you raise someone, you can look into their eyes and just know it's them. At which point he makes a grab for Melina's face. She holds his hand back, and then she lets him go, and he peels off her face, and it turns out Melina was actually Natasha. It turns out this was essentially a Trojan horse. It turns out in that when we cut away from Melina and Natasha to go check on the Red Guardian and Yelena, it turns out that in that brief period, Melina and Natasha thought up a plan. Essentially what their plan was to switch places, which involved swapping outfits. And what their plan was, and essentially what was going to happen was that Natasha would go up and meet with Dreykov and distract him while Melina would break them out of the cell. Since she was part of the Red Room, she obviously got everything organized. And essentially what she would do is that she would go to the engines, shut them down, and bring the station down to the ground, at which point they would activate Natasha's tracker. General Ross would come running because she's a wanted fugitive, and they'd be able to come in and arrest Dreykov. As such, once Dreykov discovers that Natasha, the plan is immediately set into motion as Melina breaks herself and the Red Guardian out of their cells, and she contacts. At which point she then contacts Yelena, who it turns out that when Natasha knocked her out, she put an earpiece in her ear so that she and Melina could actually be in contact. And it turns out that when she was unconscious, Natasha slipped a knife into her pocket, and so she used that to break free of her binds, attack her doctors, and get out of there. With her part of the plan essentially to find where they're keeping the chemicals and make sure that the other widows can be exposed to that stuff and free them. However, as they set this plan in motion, Dreykov begins playing his hand as he immediately figures out, as he's able to use that little touchscreen of his and able to check the security, and he catches Melina trying to shut down the engines, and so he immediately cuts her off. Which kind of going out of order here. But before that, however, Natasha wants to know what exactly happened, and she wants to know what happened to her daughter, Natasha sees just how callous he is, just how cruel he is, and she's like, you don't really care about anybody, do you? It's like, did you even feel anything when I killed your daughter? At which point he just starts laughing and says, what you did there was actually you actually gave me the greatest gift. At which point he looks to Taskmaster and says, show her. At which point Taskmaster hits a button on his sleeve, he takes his helmet off, and we soon learn that this version of Taskmaster is not a he, he's a she. And she is Dreykov's daughter. It turns out that when she was caught in the explosion, she wasn't killed, but part of her face was severely damaged, and based on the dialogue, I think she was at least at a point of near death. So Dreykov put a chip in the base of her neck and to keep her going, and now she's just as subservient to him as the rest of the widows are. And because of the chip she put in his neck, she's just always watching always studying, always calculating. It's how she's able to it's how she's able to copy people's moves so efficiently. She's just always paying attention, so she never misses anything, and so she's able, and I'm guessing through the chip in her neck, she's able to just copy their abilities to the most efficiently. It's just really friggin' creepy. And he just tells Natasha, like, does the sight of her disgust you? It's like, well, you should have thought of that before you blew her face off. At which point, when he discovers what Natasha's plan was, he tells Taskmaster to go take care of it, to go take care of everything while he stays behind to deal with, while leaving Natasha. At which point Natasha says, well, you shouldn't have gotten rid of him. Now there's no one here to stop me from killing you. So she pulls a gun on Dreykov, but she can't seem to pull the trigger. He then tells her, well, why don't you pull a knife? She tries that. She can't even stab it into him. And it turns out that Dreykov actually has countermeasures for this. It turns out for years, even before he started doing the chemical mind control, he created like a pheromone block to him so that any widows that he has under his employ, once they get a good whiff of him, they can't hurt him, even if they wanted to. So pretty much Natasha's kind of between a rock and a hard place now. In the meantime, and down with the rest of the group, as Melina and the Red Guardian are kind of having a moment, Taskmaster comes down, and the Red Guardian even admits, well, what's my part in the plan? Because he doesn't really bring anything to the table. And so that's when Taskmaster shows up and says, well, why don't you go fight him? And so while Melina goes out to try and shut off the engines, she and Taskmaster just get into it. The Red Guardian and Taskmaster get into a fight, and it's clear it's a one-sided battle. As such, Melina is able to get the chemicals, but back with Natasha and Dreykov, Natasha is just Dreykov says that he's got a private army, he's operating in the shadows, he runs the world, and yada yada yada, which actually leads to a really humorous interaction with as Black Widow just immediately starts calling him out on all of his BS. Like saying, you're operating the shadows, nobody even knows you exist, you pathetic, when was the last time you had a conversation with someone that you didn't force to talk to you? And it just starts getting under his skin to the point where he starts lashing out at her and even starts decking her because she can't fight back. And she just keeps mocking him, saying, this is all you can do? You can only fight back when it's against a defenseless little girl? And he just keeps decking her and punching her and even kicks her in the face. At which point he says, I'll show you just how much range I have. And so he logs onto his terminal, which he unlocks like via his ring and opening it a certain way with said ring. And so he shows that the widows he has in the Red Room are not the only ones that he has at his disposal. There are widows all across the world. All of them from girls that he's picked up off the streets. And as we learned earlier in the movie, Yelena told them he takes all these girls from off the streets, he puts them through hell, and most of them don't survive, but the ones that do, he turns into his widows. He doesn't really care about any of them. They're all just replaceable to him. And so he just continues bragging about how he has all this power under his control. He can destabilize governments. He can let nations rise, etc. And Natasha's just looking at it all and it's like, and you control all that from that little console there. And he's like, And then she just walks up to him and smugly says, thank you for your cooperation. At which point, we actually get one of my favorite, we soon learn that there's actually more to this than meets the eye. It turns out that while Melina and Natasha were having their little plan talk, Melina actually warned Natasha about the pheromone block. And while Natasha's initial plan was just to not breathe, which is stupid if you ask me, Melina tells her that that she has to sever the nerve endings from the nasal cavity to the brain. And that's when we learn why Natasha was egging him on. She wanted him to break her nose to sever the nerve, and unfortunately he didn't hit hard enough. So Natasha slams her own head down to break her nose. At which point she smacks his hand before he can turn off the console, and then she knocks him out. It's just perfect. In the meantime, down below in the engines, since Melina's plan didn't work, she decides to go directly to the engines, and while there are a group of soldiers there to try and stop her, she manages to use a rocket launcher to take one of the engines down, which caused a chain reaction and causing the other engines to go out. And in the meantime, however, just before Dreykov was knocked out, he managed to activate an alarm in his office, which alerted the widows, which are causing him to run upstairs to try and take down Natasha. As such, while Natasha is able to copy down the information on all the widows, before she can get out of there, the widows that are in the red room appear and begin fighting her, with Dreykov getting up and saying, "No one leaves this room until she's dead." As such, with the place going down, he tries to make an escape, and down below, the Red Guardian is still getting his ass kicked by Taskmaster. But before she can deliver a final blow, Melina comes in and manages to knock Taskmaster into her cell, with the Red Guardian closing the door, and yeah, Taskmaster is now just kind of trapped. As such, they immediately realize they got to make a getaway, but back when Natasha, she's also getting her ass kicked royally by the widows, and while she does put up a decent fight, she's also trying to hold back because none of these widows are full control of their actions. She's not trying to hurt them, which almost does lead to her getting killed, as they just start brutalizing her. One has her in a headlock while the rest just start beating her up. But in the middle of this, we see a grenade fly through the air, and as it's beeping down, we see that around the grenade are most of the remaining vials. And when it goes off, all the vials break, and all the widows in the room get a good whiff of the gas. And as they start regaining their senses, immediately they stop fighting Natasha, as we see Yelena standing in the doorway, and they realize they kind of need to get out of there. As such, the widows ask, "What do we do?" And Natasha says, "Go and make your own choices." And so the widows head out while Natasha and Yelena, that was when Natasha copied down the available the data on all the widows around the world, and she managed to grab a few of the extra vials of the gas to try and find ways to reproduce it. And as such, pretty much everything's just going to hell, as Dreykov gets with a group of their soldiers and they try to make a run for it, with Dreykov realizing too late that Natasha stole his ring, so he realizes that she now has access to his data, which I already said. We got the Red Guardian and Melina getting into a jet and flying away as the Red Room is just collapsing around everyone. We see Dreykov and his soldiers getting into a jet, only for Melina to immediately take out this electric staff and destroy the engines for the jet before it can take off, causing the whole thing to explode, killing off Dreykov. But with Natasha, as she's escaping, she does manage to find Taskmaster's cell, and she just tells Taskmaster, "I'm so sorry. I know this isn't you. I'm going to let you go, and I know you're going to hunt me, but it's fine." And so she opens up the cell, and Taskmaster steps out, and it looks like he's about to throttle. And I have to remember that Taskmaster is a she. Before Taskmaster can throttle Natasha, the wing they're in that just breaks, and it causes Natasha, and it separates them. Natasha is able to make it out to the airstrip in time to see Yelena destroy Dreykov's ship or jet, but in the process, Yelena, I keep getting their names mixed up. I'm so sorry. Yelena is thrown off the Red Room and dropped through the air. As such, Natasha jumps off the dock and manages to catch up to Yelena and secure a parachute to her so she's safe. But then she looks up, and from the Red Room she sees Taskmaster coming at her. As such, they get into a tussle in the air, fighting through debris, just kind of being at more at odds. And ultimately, they do manage to survive the fall because Taskmaster was also armed with a parachute. But even when they're on the ground, Taskmaster is still trying to kill Natasha. But ultimately, in the battle, Natasha manages to knock her helmet off. And so when Taskmaster gets close enough, Natasha manages to grab one of the vials and breaks it, allowing Taskmaster to get a good whiff of this stuff as well. And so she is free from her father's mental conditioning. As such, Natasha just kind of gently puts her on the ground while she goes to look for Yelena. When they get there, and Yelena is ultimately a little out of it, but fine. And so the Red Guardian and Melina come up because they managed to make it down, and so everybody is just kind of happy. They're all glad they made it out alive. And they're all just kind of, and essentially they're all just basking in each other's presence. And so, as they're all having a happy reunion, they begin see a convoy coming up, and it turns out, that Ross is here with his soldiers. I'm just gonna throw that over there. And so Natasha tells everyone that they have to leave, and they're like, "Oh, come on, well, we can take him." It's like, "No, you gotta go." And so she gives them the data on all the widows scattered throughout the world, as well as the last vial of serum she has, so that they can reproduce it. And on top of that, as she does this, we see another jet land, and we see all the widows coming out. As it turns out that as they came back to get them, so pretty much they have a heartfelt goodbye. Natasha is now more willing to accept them as family, and she says that she's got some business to take care of, and so the Guardian, Melina, and Yelena join the widows and fly off, while Natasha stays behind to deal with the convoy. And so the film ends by cutting to 2 weeks later, as we see Natasha in another location, and now having dyed her hair to the blonde we saw in Infinity War, as she once more meets up with her contact that set her up with the trailer and the helicopter. And it turns out that after that little incident, she's decided that she's not going to be hiding anymore. She thinks it's time that she needs to go get her friends. And so she contacted this guy to get her some resources, and it turns out that with some time and money, he was able to get her a Quinjet. And so she says that she's impressed with his work, that she's got to go get her family together, and so she boards the Quinjet to go and save her friends while the Avengers theme plays over victoriously. And the final shot of the film we see is the camera panning down to a tree with a group of fireflies just kind of swarming around it. It's some sweet stuff, so. But of course, since this is a Marvel movie, we've still got our after credits scene, and so the for the after credits scene here, this one actually takes place after Endgame, as we see Yelena now kind of more situated into a normal life, as we see that she now has a dog, which earlier in the film she said she wanted a dog. And we see her visiting a graveyard. And as she wanders through, we see that she's at Natasha's grave, which is like covered in gifts and flowers and all these nice things left by people who admired her. And she's obviously having this big emotional moment as she just hugs the gravestone and is trying not to cry. She stands up, and we have some nice soft piano piece of the Avengers theme playing. It's awesome, nice, sweet stuff. But as she's standing there, we end up hearing this woman nearby who's blowing her nose into a handkerchief. Who I wrote her name down. I shouldn't have thrown this away. And this is a woman named Valentina, who apparently was in the Disney Plus shows, but I've never seen them, so I didn't recognize her. And Yelena's like, "You shouldn't be bothering me. This is my day off." It's like, "I'm not. I'm just here grieving," and so. But at the same time, but yeah, she's also here because it turns out that Yelena is still doing assassin work, as she says, "I wanted to bring you your next target personally," as she pulls out a tablet and hands it to Yelena and says, I thought you want to take care of the person responsible for your sister's death." And we see that Yelena's next target is Hawkeye, which will probably come to fruition in the Disney Plus Hawkeye series, which I'm probably not going to see unless I have no choice, so whatever, but it's there, and it's a part of the movie, so yeah. So overall, what did I think of the movie? It's decent. And that's all I can really say. The film is decent to pretty good, and that's kind of that's kind of where my thought and that's kind of all I can really say about it overall. Like, let me first talk about what makes it work. I think the biggest strength of this film is that it really did do what it promised. It kind of did wrap up Black Widow's whole character. It actually did kind of wrap up the loose threads of Black Widow's character. In this case, following up on her past with the Red Room and her time as a Soviet agent. In this case, what we see of her time, and basically throughout the whole film, it's essentially a matter of defining what was really her identity. About whether her choices were her own or whether they were fake, whether the family she was with was really just a cover or were people that she genuinely cared about. And throughout the whole film, she's kind of at odds with that, not helped by when she actually does end up meeting her sister again. Like, throughout the whole film, she's just kind of trying to push the fake family away. Like, she keeps thinking, no, it was fake, none of that was it was fake, none of that was real, I can't have any personal attachment to that. Yet, she's just genuinely trying to deny that part of herself, but the more she denies, the more prominent that aspect of her past becomes, as Yelena comes in and it's clear they still have a connection, a bond, as when they're actually talking, Yelena gives her crap every now and then. She asks her for help. She relies on her. They bicker, they fight, but at the end of the day, it's clear that Yelena is genuinely she and Yelena, Natasha and Yelena are kind of on the same page. They all, and it's nice seeing that, but it's clear that in a few moments that Natasha is trying to treat this as more of a matter, as a team of convenience, so to speak. That they're working together for the necessity of taking down the Red Room, since they both suffered because of it. Yelena especially, since she got put through the whole chemical conditioning. But the thing is that, and ultimately, while she does end up reuniting with the Red Guardian, who was her faux father, and Melina, her faux mother, throughout the whole film, she's just, like, throughout the middle part of the film, she is not willing to accept them. Hell, when like going back to what I mentioned in the summary, how when Red Guardian, Natasha, and Yelena were ready to go and ready to go and see Melina, their helicopter crashed. Essentially, when they crashed, the Red Guardian's trying to talk about how proud he is of his kids, how they're great, and it's like, you didn't raise us, we're not your family, you didn't have anything to do with this. Like, but look at you, you're so strong. That it's like Yelena, you were one of the greatest you're one of the greatest child assassins the world has ever seen. And Natasha, you weren't just an assassin, you were an Avenger. I'm so proud of you girls. But obviously neither of them are willing to accept this. And when we get to that dinner scene I mentioned before, as the rest of the family is just trying to treat this as them being reunited and them trying to be happy, Natasha is not having any of it. She is just at her wit's end. She's adamantly trying to deny these people as people she cares about. But as the film goes on, you see her opening up to them more and more and actually becoming more accepting of them. Like, when she the more she interacts with Yelena, the more you see their sisterly bond coming out. The more they're willing to talk to each other. The more they're on the same page. And it all comes to a head in the climax when Yelena almost killed herself to take down Dreykov, and Natasha, it was like, no, don't do it, but Yelena still did it and almost died because of it. But Natasha ultimately going in to save her shows that they still care, and even then, they still have a lot of moments with each other that they share and shows that they do care about each other. Like in the beginning of the movie, they had this stupid little thing where they were hanging up, where they were just like, where they were, where you stand on your hands and legs, but you're standing with your belly up. They're doing that, and they're just kind of having fun and laughing. And Yelena at that age is like, we're both upside down. It was like just really cute, and it turns out they have like a little whistle that they whistle to each other whenever they're near each other, to let the other know where they are. At the end of the film, they bring that back, and it shows that that Natasha still cares for her. And even during the film, Natasha admitted that the reason she never looked Yelena up is because she thought Yelena had gotten out and didn't want to see her again. It's actually a little sad, especially when Yelena does admit that kind of seems offended by that statement. It's actually kind of, and it's just kind of sweet as the rest of the film goes on, especially it especially comes full circle with the Red Guardian and Melina. The Red Guardian, he's not good at this. Even by the end of the film, he realizes he's not good at this whole parenting thing. But it's clear that while he thought the assignment was a chore, he genuinely did care about his kids, so to speak. And he looks at them now and he thinks, I'm so proud of the women you've grown into. He loves them and sees them, but at the same time, but as things continue to get worse, he does start realizing his flaws and realizes, I'm a loser, and I kind of failed you guys. I served a cause that I didn't. I served a cause that I served a cause and somebody that ultimately betrayed me. I'm so sorry, and I hope you can forgive me. Which that's kind of undermined by the fact that he never gets a chance to say that to his kids. And Melina, while she definitely felt like, and for her, she felt like she had no other place to go besides the Red Room. Like she said, she was cycled through the Red Room like 4 different times before that assignment. So even when she knows the Red Room is just bad news, she thinks that she has no other place she can go. It isn't until Natasha opens up more to her and so they start talking that things start feeling that she realizes, you're my family and I at least have you. And actually that leads to a really nice scene too, where Yelena actually admitted to Natasha that, like, because one of the things Natasha believes is that her mother abandoned her and that's when the Red Room got her. Well, that's not the case at all. It turns out that the Red Room was keeping track of anybody that had, like, a certain genetic disposition that would make them a formidable widow, and they found Natasha, and when Natasha was born, they went in to get her, and they made a deal with the family to take her, but Natasha's biological mother didn't want to give her up. So even after Natasha was taken, her real mother kept looking for her until it got to the point where the Red Room realized that if she kept looking, she'd be a threat, so they offed her. In fact, during the conversation between Natasha and Dreykov, it was that Natasha actually asked about her mother first, and Dreykov was just like, "Oh yeah, we killed her. She's buried under a tree with peach flowers. So what was her name? Like, I don't remember." Like, that's just like an ultimate screw you, and that's what prompted her to ask, "You really don't care about anything, about anybody," and that's when the reveal of Taskmaster's identity. Like, throughout the whole film, it's like she's trying to keep that part of her past at arm's length, because ultimately, while it was happy, she has to keep telling herself that was a lie, none of it mattered. And when you realize that truth, it definitely can hurt, especially when Yelena realizes that she's the one that's hurt most of all, because for her, these people were her family. It may have been fake, but Melina and the Red Guardian raised her. Natasha treated her like a sister. Even if it wasn't real, they were still her family. And when she keeps hearing them talk about how it was just a job, or I was bored, or none of what we had was real, it just hurts her more and more, because she was the baby of the family, so to speak. And so when they keep telling her, and when she keeps saying the happiest moments of my life were a lie, you can tell it's just ripping her up inside, and it's just like, it's really well executed, and it definitely just pulls at your heartstrings. So, but ultimately, it's the whole family coming together and realizing that even if it was fake, they were still a family. The moments they shared together were real. The connections they made were true, and it's what gets them to ultimately come back together and fight, not just to stop the Red Room, but for each other. They want to help each other. They want to get out of this together, and it's only by working together that they manage to take down the Red Room and restore what was once broken. It's just really sweet and just a really great time. On top of that, there's still plenty of action. There's a lot of the action here is not as high powered and as high octane as other MCU films, but it's still definitely a very energetic, very fun to watch, very cool to see, especially with the hand-to-hand combat, the chase scenes, the fight scenes, and oh my god, the stuff with Taskmaster. And I'll just say that right now. I effing love this version of Taskmaster. Actually, scratch that. I love Taskmaster overall, but this version I think is the best. Like, Taskmaster is actually one of the few D-listed villains that I actually really love, because I love his whole gimmick. Essentially, like as we said in the movie, his whole thing is that he can copy the moves and abilities of those he watches. So he doesn't copy their powers, but like, say, for example, he got into a fight with Spider-Man. All he would have to do is watch Spider-Man fight for a bit, do the same flipping and all those things, and Taskmaster would be able to mimic that completely. Like, it's why throughout the movie you see Taskmaster mimicking the prowess and the weapon skills and fighting. You see him copying the fighting prowess and weapon skills of all these previous Avengers, and it's kind of like a nice little mishmash of everything they do. Like, with the shield, you can see him copying Captain America. You can see him copying Hawkeye's accuracy with a bow. You can see, like, at one point he pulls out claws and fights like Black Panther. It's all really damn cool to watch, and what sets this version apart from other versions is just how effing creepy she is. Other versions of Taskmaster are usually cold-blooded mercenaries or are leaders of a mercenary group that wants to hurt others. But this version of Taskmaster she doesn't talk, period. From her very first scene is her sitting in a room watching fight scenes from the other films before a widow comes in, plants a microchip in the base of her neck, and wakes her up. Like, that's a freaking creepy introduction. And throughout the whole film, just seeing her she's like just seeing her walking around, not saying a word, just copying the moves and not even interacting. She's like, and it just definitely fills you with a sense of unease. Helped by the fact that when you see the film from her perspective, from the inside of her visor, it's all a computer, and it's like she's a machine. It's just really off-putting and disturbing, and it keeps you from really feeling any connection to her. You just see this creepy guy. You see this creepy guy in a skull helmet just walking around kicking ass, not saying a word, and just carrying out her mission with this efficiency and coldness. And the fact that she never talked just was so off-putting. There was no connection, no human connection that you could make with her. She was like a weapon. You pointed her in a direction and she just fired, and she never stopped till she hit her target. That was perfect. It created a sense of great unease, and when you learn Taskmaster's true identity in this version of events, it definitely makes it even more tragic, because this is an innocent victim caught in the crossfire that Natasha actually has a connection to, because technically Natasha helped create her. And so, so learning that beneath that cold exterior, there's probably a scared child that can't stop what she's doing, it just makes you even more creepy, because you feel so sorry for them, but at the same time, you're still freaking afraid of them, because as you see her just staring at you with those, okay, she does blink, but with those eyes, the half burned up face, you feel like that this is just, like, though you feel sorry for her, you just want to stay as far away from her as possible. It's effective. It makes you feel something when you learn her true origin, but as an active force, Taskmaster is so effing disturbing, and it's great. I absolutely love it. On top of that, the acting, of course, is still amazing in this film. All the main actors turn in great performances, and many of them turn in some really great subtle nuances. Like, the actor they got for the Red Guardian definitely kind of has that pompousness to him as he talks himself up, but definitely feels pathetic. With Yelena's actress, I think it was great. And actually, hold on, I'll get to her in a minute. Of course, Scarlett Johansson still turns in a great performance as Black Widow, but that Melina is creepy. Dreykov definitely comes across as a scumbag, and I'll talk about him later. But of course, and as I was going to just say, Yelena, I think, is the best. She has a lot of subtle nuances throughout the whole film that you can definitely pick up on. You can tell when she's getting annoyed with a conversation and wants something to do with it. You can tell when she's feeling happy, and she doesn't even have to say a word to do it. All you have to do is just read her facial expression. When she feels uncomfortable, she makes like a face like, ugh. When she's happy, you can see her light up. You can see her when she gets excited. You can see her eyes just widen, like, ooh. It's all these little subtle nuances that help make her character feel complete. And I think, and it's as a result, I think she's one of the best versions. I think she's actually one of the best characters in this film because of that. On top of that, the villain's plan is definitely a lot creepy too, because the whole idea of subjugation and mind control is already a disturbing idea. Just having an army of these of these girls that you literally just ripped off the street and forced into this life, it definitely gives you the chills, and definitely makes you just think it just makes you super uncomfortable with where things are going. So kudos on that as well. I think that was executed well. And of course, the finale was still really heartwarming. Just having the family come together, Natasha resolving to go free the Avengers. But of course, since this film came out after Endgame, you know what's going to happen to her. And it's exemplified by that final credit scene where you see Alana visiting her grave and just having one last moment with her sister before her real job comes back and she's told that she has to go kill Hawkeye. So that's nice. I really like that. And I think that all of that together keeps this film strong. Now, what didn't I like? Well, let's start with the villain, Dreykov. I don't like this guy. He's dumb. I think he's annoying, actually. To give credit, his plan is disturbing. Kidnapping, like I said, kidnapping girls and turning them into his own private army is definite, and do mind control and chemical manipulation definitely can give you the chills and definitely can make you feel uneasy. But as a villain, yeah, he's pathetic. Like, he doesn't really appear that often throughout the film. Like, for the first 2/3, he's talked about, but we don't see him aside from maybe, like, 1 or 2 scenes. And otherwise, he just kind of feels like a regular scumbag. When we do see him, he just kind of all arrogant and haughty, like he's all holding the cards and all so forth. I thought that was just, like, he was definitely creepy, but he kind of just felt like a regular mishmash of other villains we've seen before. Like, his whole plan is I have this secret army of girls that obey my every command, and through them I'm going to take over the world, and so forth. It's just the same drabble we've seen before from villains, and I think it's kind of dumb. And speaking of kind of useless characters, the Red Guardian. Now, I'm not going to now again, the whole arc with the Red Guardian in relation to his family, I think, was actually really sweet, and his actor turned in a great performance, and I still love the Red Guardian costume. But in terms of usefulness of the story, he said it best, he offered nothing. Really, he was only there because I think his name had brand recognition. That the filmmakers would say, "Oh, we got the Red Guardian in this movie," and so forth. Which, yeah, I think that's exactly what happened. Otherwise, the guy is just pathetic. For the majority of the movie, he's reveling in in his glory days and what he used to be, and the rest of the time he's either making dad jokes or looking pathetic, or at times when he looks like he can be useful, like in an actual fight, he gets his ass handed to him. When Melina sent him to fight the fight against Taskmaster, Taskmaster just beat him. Like, there was no point in the fight where it looked like the Red Guardian was winning, and he only managed to get an advantage by Melina coming in and saving his ass, and the only thing he contributed to the fight was finally locking the Red Guardian in. I suppose you could say he kept the Taskmaster from going after Natasha and Yelena, but again, he didn't even get an advantage over Taskmaster. It's kind of pathetic. The only major contributions he did were leading Natasha and Yelena to Melina, and at one point knocking a soldier off the jet that he and Melina were piloting to get off the Red Room, and even that accidentally caused the jet to crash as the soldier hit one of their wings and caused the thing to spiral out of control. So, yeah, good job, Alexei. You definitely are the Red Guardian. And again, to be fair, the character arc with him is still really nice, and seeing him trying to rekindle the love of his relationship with his daughters and kind of bungle it definitely can be funny. And again, that scene where he's starting to try and sing American Pie to Yelena to show he really was paying attention, that he really did care about her by expressing this moment that they shared. It's sweet, and I love it. It's just really nice to watch, but just the rest of the movie, he offers nothing. You could have written in another character and replaced the Red Guardian, and it wouldn't have made a difference. It would have been. You could have even cut him out, and it could have just been like the relationship between Natasha, Melina, and Yelena, and just kind of written around how they discovered Melina. Like, maybe say like Natasha's friend gave her the contact. At best, all it really did was show us that prison break scene, which, to be fair, is a really cool scene. But again, the Red Guardian really does not offer anything to the plot. It's clear his better days are behind him, and while it's clear he definitely has superpowers and can be strong, and he could have been formidable, the film doesn't really showcase that much. So, yeah, that's a problem. On top of that, another problem I think I have with the movie is, unfortunately, its tone. One of the bigger problems with the film, it just kind of feels tonally confused. Like, going back to, like, there are several scenes where it feels like they're trying to have one tone, but again it gets intermixed with another, and instead of having one over the other, it just kind of feels like a whiplash, and neither style really meshes. Like, for example, going back to the scene where Natasha and Yelena were at that little gas station or convenience store. Yes, that was the word, convenience store. Yelena begins talking about how Natasha apparently always poses when she's in battle, and how she thinks it's kind of stupid. Which, to be fair, that's a funny running gag, as they mention it again throughout the movie, coming full circle when Yelena does it too, and she's just disgusted with herself. for it. But when but she's talking about how silly and stupid it is to do poses in the middle of battle while they're talking about a serious topic of lost childhood and loss of innocence, or how their family wasn't real. Like, this is a serious conversation. Why are you interjecting that into that? And then going back to the prison scene, it's supposed to be like this high intense moment, but in the middle of it, Yelena ends up getting too close, and you see Natasha yelling at her, like, "What are you doing? Come on, get back!" Or yada yada. Like, it feels so tonally jarring in the middle. Good lord, the middle of film also kind of is where things go wrong as well, because during this dinner scene, they're talking like they're a big family, and they start making jokes about how, like, with Red Guardian and Elena clearly still have some kind of sexual attraction, and Melina still have, I got their name. The Red Guardian and Melina clearly still have some kind of attraction to each other going on, and it gets Black Widow and it gets Natasha and Yelena just go, oh god, no. But this is in the middle of a serious conversation about them trying to discuss the chemical subjugation and how they have to stop it. Like, it feels so tonally jarring, and it's not helped by the Red Guardian too. Which, yeah, because he's constantly written as this pathetic loser who's reveling in his glory days. When he tries to have serious moments, he does, like, it showcases that he's just bad at this, but at the same time, it just makes him feel, it gets you as annoyed with him as the characters are. Like, at several moments when they get annoyed with him and just want him to go away, you're thinking to yourself, why is he here? And it definitely hurts the movie overall. Now, the final third, they do kind of get their tones lined up more, and the humor does definitely match up better. But especially in the middle of the movie, stuff like that is annoying, and it can definitely cut into it. And then finally, I think the biggest problem with this movie, and I think one of the bigger, and what I think, I'm not saying that this is a fact, this is what I think. Well, I think one of the biggest contributing factors to why this movie didn't do as well as Disney had hoped, I think it's because of the timing. This film clearly feels like it's trying to be a breath of fresh air after the events of Endgame, like to just kind of calm down, especially since the last film we got in the MCU prior to this, Spider-Man Far From Home, was still dealing with the fallout from Endgame. For Black Widow, this feels like things are calm again, like they're returning, like they're getting back to the basics, that they're going back into their paces and so forth. Like, because we see Black Widow not dealing with this big end of the world threat or something large and imposing. It's her trying to clean up her past and stop a supervillain, which I think which in my opinion I think could work. But the thing is, at the time that this film actually was released, we had plenty of time to calm down from that. And if anything, by the time this film came out, we kind of needed something bigger and more intense. We kind of need to help us get back into it. And to be fair, the thing is, we're not really, and before this film came out, we weren't exactly bereft of MCU material, because before this film came out, they started releasing the Disney Plus shows, WandaVision, Falcon and the Winter Soldier, at the time, and when this film actually was released in theaters, Loki. Before this, like, this film felt like it was trying to be the start of something new, like, get us back into the groove, and get us back into the feel, but by this time, we've already calmed down enough, and we've already had 3 other shows to help us get back into everything. So at this point, it just feels like another Marvel movie at this point. So it doesn't really have the same impact, and I think that's the reason why the film ultimately isn't doing as well as Disney had hoped. It's not doing terrible. I've looked at the box office, and it's actually got, and it's reached its financial quota, and is still earning a little bit, and earned a little bit more. So they're not losing money on this movie. It's just at the same time, they're not exactly gaining a lot either. And again, I think it's just because of the timing. If this film was released when it was supposed to, I think, I could be wrong. I think that it could have gotten a bigger box office response. Like, this is a good way to end it all for Black Widow, which I think it was, but ultimately, but because it had to be delayed due to COVID, it ultimately doesn't have the same impact that it would have had it come out in May of last year. So, yeah. I think that's another big flaw. It feels like it's supposed to be a breath of fresh air to try and get everything back to normal, but by this point we've already taken quite a few breaths, and we faced other crises before, so this one just kind of feels tame, especially considering that the film actually, considering the time when this film takes place in the chronology of the MCU. So, yeah. But again, while those problems are prominent, like the tone can be disjointed in some areas and can be off-putting. Some characters don't really feel like they don't need to be there, specifically Red Guardian, and Dreykov is still a kind of lame villain who ultimately we're told stuff about instead of actually showing him doing this stuff. Which I think is the biggest problem. Show don't tell. Actually show him do to like see him over like we could see him overseeing this or doing this stuff. I think that would have been more impressive and would have definitely cemented just how much of a scumbag this guy was. But it's because while that stuff is a problem in the movie, the rest of the film I still think really works. I love the character. I love the arcs with the between the main characters and seeing how they develop. I like seeing I like seeing Natasha's story get closed. I like seeing the action. I like the connect. I love the whole message of family isn't just who you're born. Of how I like seeing these people come back together as a family and realizing that ultimately, even if it was a mission, they're still family and they're willing to fight for each other, no matter what. I like Taskmaster definitely was a better villain than her father was, and I as for her for Taskmaster's MCU debut, I think they did a great job at making her look appropriately creepy, even if at this point Taskmaster may not be a villain anymore. So I doubt we'll be seeing her again. But ultimately, and of course we got some great action, and while the humor may have felt a bit disjointed in some areas, when it did work, it was actually really funny. It had a lot of good emotional moments, some good development, good acting, good action. Overall, Black Widow is, at the end of the day, just a decent movie. Not perfect, but a decent movie. Pretty good overall, and I do say that if you are interested in seeing the movie, then you should go and check it out. It's got great moments. It's got some heartwarming moments, some heart-throbbing moments, some fun moments, some disturbing moments. It's got a decent pace. It's got great action. It's got great characters, aside from one or two. Overall, I recommend if you're interested in the MCU and you want to see more, and you want to see more of Black Widow, then check out Black Widow. It's a good movie, and it's definitely I think it's a decent addition to the MCU film roster. So, yeah, I think that's about all I have to say. So, yeah, for those that stayed for the full hour and a half, I thank you for sticking around. And next week we're gonna be going back to Code Lyoko and talk about that show. And while in the next few weeks I am going to be talking about something MCU related, we'll get to that when we get to that. The next time we venture back into the films, we are going to be seeing the debut of the Master of Kung Fu himself as we dig into Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings.